Ladies and gentlemen, this is Russ at OSD Public Affairs. Thank you for calling in for today's brief. We have Lieutenant General Dennis Crall, the Director of Command and Control Communications and Computers and Cyber, as well as the Chief Information Officer, Joint Staff, J6, here today to answer your questions about the Joint JADC2 and its implementation plan. We have about 45 minutes today for this brief. I will call on the journalist as this continues. You get an opportunity to ask a question and then a follow-up before we move on to the next one. After we cycle through the group, we'll go ahead and start again until we've either closed on the 45 minutes or all the questions are done. And then General Crall have an opportunity to close out the session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to General Crall for an opening comment.
Look, I really appreciate the opportunity to explain just briefly where we are in the story on the department's efforts to deliver a true joint all-domain command and control capability. And rather than spending a long time in an opener, I really prefer to get to your questions to leave us plenty of time to give the best answer I can based on where we are in this journey. So what I'd like to do is, just as a brief reminder, kind of walk back. This is the fourth artifact and the final artifact in the delivery of the planning for JADC2 delivery. This started some time ago when the Deputy Secretary authored the cross-functional team charter, which really provided the workspace, place, headspace for all the various efforts throughout all of DoD. On the OSD side, the military side, and even in some of the supporting elements to come together, one, to map where we were in the efforts that we've had, illuminating those areas, and then starting to formulate where the department needed to go. There was really a sincere effort to put that together, and there was clearly a lack of structure and operational or organizational design on how we were to move forward. I've said in the past, this effort to deliver a JADC2 capability is not novel. The department has been on this journey in several other attempts, some which have been marginally successful, and some which have failed altogether. And this was a different approach, quite a different approach in the starting point with that CFT charter. One of the reasons this did not end up in a typical program office, as the department has often done, is speed. The Deputy Secretary and Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs wanted this to move quickly, but smartly, and also wanted to accept more risk than we take in traditional programs, meaning that we have an appetite and expect to fail fast and then fix and then scale. And so this apparatus that was developed to define the problem and lay out that roadmap ahead and oversee the delivery of these very specific elements was created. That was about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer ago, maybe a year and some change. The next document that came out, really our seminal piece, was the strategy signed by the Secretary himself. And this was really important for us to determine the end state on where JADC2 was heading, to make sure that we could prepare ourselves for that fight that we expect not only today, but also tomorrow. And in very simple terms, this was the recognition that data and data centricity was at the heart of success in our next warfight. We are awash in sensor data, unable to keep up really the human intensive labor, and at the pace we were moving, we couldn't take advantage of it. We could not bring in machine learning, artificial intelligence to really look at the make sense aspect of the data that we were receiving. Much of it hit the cutting room floor. And finally, we couldn't get to the act, the most critical point of making sure that information was distilled so that warfighters and decision makers could make the best decision at the speed of relevance that was needed. That strategy laid out clear lines of effort, specifically what it was we needed to accomplish, and really those large bins and buckets. While that document is classified for a host of reasons, we were able to recently release an unclassified version, which at least provides a sense of those lines of effort and where the department is trying to go with them. So once you know where you want to go, the next document in that series was the posture review. And that really is simply looking at your gaps. If you know where you want to go and there's some areas you can't go, you got to define why. That posture review took a look at those gaps, defined them very clearly, and then prioritized them, all with an eye toward funding and also those pieces that need to have a developmental priority, both in the R&E and S&T communities. Sometimes we knew where we wanted to go, but technology may not have been there. And so we took a look at what it took and how to prioritize those to fill those gaps. But the seminal document that we've been waiting for, and it's been difficult for the reasons you might expect, it's so comprehensive. But the document that we've been waiting for is the implementation plan, which the Deputy Secretary just recently signed. And the reason that's important, the department unfortunately has examples over the past couple decades, at least that I'm aware, where we've got up to that culmination point of defining where we want to go and those gaps, but the delivery mechanism, the how we're going to get there, who's responsible, what order do you put these in, what are the prerequisites to make sure that you have an actionable plan that can be executed, and finally, those milestones, which include funding. If those are absent, what you end up with is a really neat story, a grand idea, but really nothing that comes off the conveyor belt at the other end. And this is what the I-Plan actually does for us, is it takes a look very clearly at specific and prioritized plans. How are we going to accomplish the very things that we said, again, in what order? How do you measure them? How do we leverage the boards, bureaus, working groups, cells, committees that are in the building to empower them to move these to fruition? It does provide a sense of shared awareness. You don't always know what others are working on. So the I-Plan captures that in its fullest. So you can look across your lane of expertise, be informed by some of the other efforts, and maybe that provides opportunity to come up with a better way. Not all overlap is bad, but if your Venn diagram has too much Venn in it, then you're really wasting resources at that point. So increasing awareness with the I-Plan is also a residual benefit. The other thing it does is it allows us to look at these emerging technologies and figure out where they fit in the process, rather than simply focusing on what is directly in front of us, but anticipating that next need, anticipating the threat, and how we can leverage what may not even be available today to meet that landing spot when it does become available. So very importantly in that implementation plan, the front end of it captures what I just described. The back end of it is going to remain electronic, meaning that there's some, it's a malleable document that we can go in and again, leverage what we learn on the fly and not lock ourselves into something that we can't move or advantage. So that piece really takes a look at who's responsible. The 5 W's plus the H of how we get there are all captured in that implementation plan. So we can point to who has the lead, who is providing support, and the most important aspect that I mentioned before are those milestones for delivery. Have we satisfied the prerequisites? Have we even identified what they are? Is this the right order of march? Do we have a good funded delivery timetable that makes sense? Do we have a testing apparatus lined up with this so we can learn very quickly? And most importantly, do we have an eye to the threat so that we don't lock ourselves into something that we would eventually deliver that will not meet success on the battlefield? That's why the implementation plan is so critical and important to what we do. It's classified for reasons you might expect. I can talk a little bit and provide even some examples of how this may come together. But one of the areas when you prioritize against vulnerabilities and threats, that's not something we would like to advertise to our adversaries. And also you might expect that as we partner with industry to assist us in moving forward, many of these contracts have not been let. And it's unwise to reveal responsible parties and the orders which we might prosecute some of those before we have the contractual pieces in place. So for those reasons and a few others, the document's classified, but the idea and sentiment that I gave you and the level of detail therein is real. I don't believe I've exaggerated any of it. The most crucial aspect is now in front of us. We have all 4 parts. And we've talked some time ago, and I've said very specifically, this is the year of delivery. And that's exactly what we intend to do. I think we've talked, we've studied, we've interacted, we've mapped. It's now time to put these together and learn by doing. So with that, I welcome your questions.
Thank you, General. Media, as a reminder, you get an opportunity for a question and then a follow-up before we move on to the next question. First question goes to Brandy Vincent with NextGov.
Thanks, Russ, and thank you so much, Lieutenant General Crall, for doing this. You sort of alluded to this, but there was a variety of different inspirations for JADC2. There was also a DoD-led study on Russian new generation warfare a few years ago that found that multi-domain battle is how Russia might be beaten in the next generation of war. And in some parts, I think JADC2 grew from that idea and that concept. Can you please elaborate a little bit on how important JADC2 capabilities might be amid this ongoing and evolving conflict surrounding Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and particularly if the U.S. military becomes more involved?
That's a great question. So I will say very clearly that I don't think it matters what we're pursuing, what conflict or what challenge we're facing. The speed of, first of all, the volume of information is only growing exponentially. And we have the ability with the sensors. Hardly anything is private anymore. Almost the unblinking, all-seeing eye is everywhere. So we're awash in sensor data. We also know that in order to take and make sense of that sensor data, we've got to be able to bring the human-machine interface alive. We need to be aided to know what information is important and at what time it's important. Back 20 or 30 years ago, having human analysts wade through full motion video, for example, looking for that needle in a haystack, we're now looking for the needle in the needle stack. This has become even more challenging. And most importantly, it's speed. So if you think about whether it's the Russian-Ukraine conflict or any conflict, or even how we spend our money in the department for exercising, testing, it's about making the smartest decision at speed. And that's the difference. If the clock wasn't on us, this might be a different pursuit, meaning you could take your time, you could make a lot of mistakes, you'll eventually get to the answer. And if it didn't matter when you got to the answer, then I guess that process would be good enough. But an answer good enough or a perfect answer delivered too late isn't good enough. And that's really our dilemma. So we've talked about, in a lot of our war colleges, this idea of Boyd's OODA loop, being able to operate in a decision cycle faster than your adversary. What you described in that multi-domain, multi-battle, the power of information has never been stronger. The machine-human interface, the need has never been greater. And JADC2 is attempting to leverage that so that we can deliver the best decision to the warfighter in the fastest time. So I think it's as relevant as ever and will be more so going forward.
Thank you so much for that. And then just a really quick follow-up. We understand that the implementation plan was on Deputy Secretary Hicks' desk for at least a couple of weeks. The plan is classified, but can you speak at all to any of the revisions or additions that you or she contributed broadly to it?
I can. I think we can talk at least in some broad terms. One, this took a little bit of time. Because I'll be honest, I have never been involved in a product or a process in my 35 years of commissioned service where I had so much leadership support and personal involvement. And I will say that the Deputy Secretary, Dr. Hicks, understands this extremely well. She knows where she wants to go and knows some of the pitfalls in the past of what has prevented us from getting there. She has partnered very well with the vice chairman, both the previous one and the current one, and they are intimately involved in the details of delivery. So that takes a little bit of time, and I'll tell you right now, I call that welcomed time. That's where your leadership rolls up sleeves and really works with you to ensure that there's a common understanding, the challenge is properly scoped and set. And I think, if I look at what Dr. Hicks was really looking at, was making sure that the I plan really in that forensic decomposition of working our way from delivery all the way to assignments had all the pieces in it, that we weren't overlooking parts that would be critical, again, to informing how we prioritize, how we budget, what policy, either limitations or empowerments were already in place. So that was, again, phenomenally welcomed interaction with leadership to get there. And you think about the other aspect of the players involved in this. This isn't a single service. It's not just one program office. It's the entire DoD. So the vastness of this. We also have DoD efforts underway, as I'm sure most of you know. Project Overmatch, Project Convergence, ABMS, they're all alive and well. And while many of them are kind of in their nascent areas and expertise and what they're looking for service and COCOM acumen and prowess, they feed into this. So that had to be considered as well. Not stopping those activities, but harnessing their energy and direction, but making sure that we're not getting, divergent or working at cross purposes. All of those culminated in taking just a little more time to make sure we got this right. And I'm also very reassured that by keeping the back half of this electronic, we're not locked into what we knew on the day of signature.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Russ.
Thank you, General, and thank you, Brandy. Next question goes to Angus with Military Technology.
Hello, thanks, Russ. Thanks, General. I was struck reading the summary document that under line of effort 2, there's a huge task there of education and training. It mentions educating leaders within defence, and also the DoD workforce must be proficient in identifying institutional changes that you're going to have to implement in order to get this through and working. But I'm also thinking that it must go way beyond that, because you've got intelligence agencies who we know have had their own journey over the last 20 years of whether they're sharing too much or whether they're not sharing enough, and allies as well who have their own bespoke processes in place already. How are you going to make that all work together, and what are the consequences of not getting everyone on the same page?
Well, we live the consequences of not getting everyone on the same page. That's what status quo is. So I think, the risk is continuing the current trajectory apart from JADC2. That would be a risk. This is actually designed as an attempt to bring those entities together so that we can look at this problem holistically. And the reason that line of effort is important is that we say frequently that we are pursuing data centricity. Years ago, the idea was really network. In fact, many of the writers in these technical forums have written a lot on network centricity. And at the time, that was really the buzzword. We were going to mesh ourselves to make sure information had a pathway. And then we realized that really was not an element on the periodic table of C2, but more of a compound. It had other parts you could break apart. And then we started getting focused on application centricity. It was all about the application. And that went on for a few years. And we realized there's something else to this. And finally, the latent discovery for us was data. Data is the element that we're pursuing. And data centricity has 3 parts to it. The first really is people. We hardly ever speak of this because we're so focused on the second tenet, which is technology. And then the third piece is process or policy. If you want to capture data centricity, you got to line all 3 of those up. I am confident that we will solve the technical pieces of JADC2. There is a way to do this. I also believe that process and policy, under the right pressures, will form around the needs of the department, and we will find ways to do things in an efficient and safe way. I am less optimistic on the people side if we don't take some pretty strong action. It's really the people that are our strongest asset. And really, as a department, as a government, even beyond DoD, while there is value with our people, we don't really have the best roadmap. We don't really know what it means to recruit the right market. We don't really know what it means to train and develop the kind of workforce we need, not only today, but in the future. And for those who don't stick around, this retention issue is one that we need to get a grasp of and figure out why. And we know that working in the government can be challenging. Things like onboarding delays, security clearances, some of the educational requirements that are in place, and the pay in some cases, where the pay may not be commensurate with industry. But I'll be honest, the people that we talk to love to work in this field because they can do something that they can't do anywhere else. And they're patriots at heart and they want to give back to their country, still very much alive. So I really appreciate the question in the sense that we've got to take a look at people as strongly as we do technology. Otherwise, this enterprise, the JADC2 experiment that we're going through now in attempted delivery will not be successful. I'm encouraged that it made the cut and it's got a strong voice in every forum that we're in front of. So I believe we've got it right. I believe there's clearly the right amount of attention to this, but we haven't cashed that check yet. We now have to do what we've recognized are our shortfalls. To the second part of your question, how do we bring in all the people to do this? That's precisely what JADC2 is leveraging, not just for the US entities and not just for our letter agencies that support our efforts, which we already have processes in place. We are revigorating some of the forums we have with our international partners. We know that Five Eyes sit at the table in many of these, but the table is spread pretty wide with our coalition partners as well, who have helped us develop the pieces that we can share. So inclusion is the solution to ensuring that we get a better outcome and that we're not leaving some really good ideas out of the room.
Angus, did you have a follow-up?
I sort of have like about 7 follow-ups, but I'll just stick to one little bit, which is, are you therefore saying that recruitment and retention will be in scope for JADC2 line of effort 2?
Yes, I'm saying that exactly. We have a vested interest. Those OPRs, the principals who will be responsible for that come from lots of different places. But it's a collective responsibility to make sure that we look at our workforce. I mean, I've even testified on this, that our workforce needs are different than they were 15 or 20 years ago. The people that we really need as part of our organization want a different work environment. They want a different structure. I don't think we'll have any problem recruiting the people we need, but we've got to listen to what their needs are. And we've got to be flexible as an organization that has historically functioned with a very firm and rigid hierarchy, with a lot of people who get into this business of recent, like more shared space at the table, where you don't have to work through 17 layers of seniority to get an idea to the forefront. They want to live where they want to live and work in those places they want to live. So is it necessary, for example, to have everyone live in a place that, that if it has cyber in front of it, also has the word fort in front of it? Maybe you don't have to live on a fort in order to do some of the work that we're talking about. Maybe the educational requirements, it's better focused on your credentials and your competency rather than just formal courses, et cetera. There's a whole smattering of things that we need to look at that would attract the right workforce. And recruitment is a key piece of this because it directly impacts our ability to execute JADC2.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnes. Let's move to Teresa Hitchens with Breaking Defense.
Thanks, Russ, and thank you, General Crall. It's nice to see you again. As we learned in school, strategy encompasses goals, ways, and means. I take it it's fair to say that the strategy document that you just released a summary of is the goals, the implementation plan is the ways, but the means, the budget, those are actually in the hands of the services. So you said that this implementation plan has some funding, I guess, guidance in it. Can you talk about what that is, given that actually the Joint Staff doesn't have funding authority? That's in the hands of the services. So can you explain how you intend to match the means to the ways that are in this implementation plan?
You bet. And this is the beauty of the organization, because the cross-functional team, even though it sits where it sits as being executed or chaired with the Joint Staff J6, it's not a Joint Staff J6 entity. We have 2 feeders right now that come out of that cross-functional team. And the power of the money that moves through that is married very well with the power of requirements through the Joint Staff. So to answer your question directly, and the reason that partnership between the vice chairman and the deputy secretary is so critical, you are right. The power of the purse in really DOD flows through the DMAG from the deputy secretary, and that DMAG channel is very much alive in that cross-functional team output. And it works hand in hand with the joint staff requirement of validated requirements through the JROC. And those two things should never be separated. You don't want to put funding against things that are not valid requirements. And you certainly don't have the power in the joint staff to direct service budgets, never intended, nor is it being sought. So the way this machine actually functions is the vice chairman has really reinvigorated the JROC and the JROC community to make sure that when things are postured inside of that cross-functional team, if they're already in play and it's a funding matter, a milestone matter, a timing matter, they get fed directly into the DMAG for direction from the deputy secretary to the services. And if these are new starts, good ideas, et cetera, that need to have requirements associated with them first, those collectives are gathered, brought through the JROC, validated, and then pushed over to the DMAG. And of course, the deputy secretary has a whole host of things, of funding mechanisms to get after everything in near term through reprogramming, all the way to out years of formal palming, and then things like the Rapid Defense Experimentation Reserve or Raider Fund that allows some level of innovation to take place. So that's how we accomplish that balance between the requirements piece on the joint side and the true funding piece and the authorities that rest with the deputy secretary through the DMAC.
Okay, can I follow up then? You've been working on this for, as you said, for about a year, and you and General Parker have in the past talked about minimum viable products. Can you talk about what the priorities are for actual delivery in this year, in this next coming year, now that this is a formal document and a formal plan? Yes,
I can. So, to answer your question, very bluntly and honestly, while we have 7 MVPs that are out there, and they range from, you can actually do the number count a little bit differently depending on how you aggregate them, but they're largely around identity, credential, and management, cloud, our transport layer, zero trust environment, mission partner environment, DevSecOps, which could be broken up into a couple different things, basically platform at large, and things like cloud, things like that. And there's all work involved in all of those. And in some cases, there are statutory authorities that rest, like with the CIO for some of that selection, with our data enterprise in the building, and services have some roles in that. So not stepping on those toes at all, but there are 2 areas that we've picked of those that we are looking to accelerate, and that it really are our focus this year. And I mean delivery soonest. And the first one is DevSecOps. And to give you the use case, because we could spend a lot of time going through, is there a benefit in selecting a platform? What would the platform look like? Don't we already have a couple of those platforms? Do you need to be so specific with big standards? Or are you going to have little standards? How do you prevent so much divergence that they start working at cross purposes and no longer become affordable? All good questions. But what we're really focused on this year is a use case where I cannot recall the department doing this. I could stand corrected if someone comes up with an example, but our teams that are working on this don't have one. And to some of you, it may sound modest or even small, but I want you to think about what hasn't existed before and what we're trying to accomplish. That is to take an application. Since applications rule our environments and they crush us in budgets, they don't have APIs on the backside. I can't exchange data the way that I need to exchange data. They're locked up going in, they're locked up coming out, and they misbehave on the network. Almost impossible to manage on the network. Either chatty, unsecure, or I can't share them with others at a time that I need to share them, and forget about patching. The patching protocol is so problematic that we don't do this in the times that are necessary. That's the present environment. So what we're attempting to do in DevSecOps this year is to take a series of applications. We've let the services come forward, which the ones that they want to create first. And this environment on a common platform with a common developer's toolkit will create a secure application that comes directly out of the developmental environment with an authority to operate, placed directly on the network with a reciprocity agreement and shared by the other services literally in minutes. And so we went out to customers. And again, if you're an industry, you would look at this and probably yawn and say, do that every day, right? Every Fortune 500 company iterates like this, hundreds of API adjustments every day. We don't, for a host of reasons. So that from start to finish, from developing to publishing to hosting to using, and then real-time patching to ensure that's secure, and then giving this homework between the services to let them test drive their developmental environments developed by others or to grade each other's homework will start soon. Pieces of that are already underway. That's kind of element number one. Element number two in DevSecOps is to take some of our most misbehaving applications in the environment, which I would prefer not to mention right now, and put them through the redevelopment gauntlet and have them reformatted into this viable application that I just described so that it can behave properly on the network and we can share data. This really came to light in some of the crisis actions that we went through for things like Afghanistan and even what we're seeing now in the Russian-Ukraine conflict, looking at just simply trying to pull information out of systems that just do not behave right. We can't live this way any longer. So DevSecOps, as I've just described it, is really one of the areas that we're looking to accomplish this year, and we've got a tremendous head start. We are not starting from cold steel. We've got lots of those elements. Every service has a viable means, and we now have a bake-off of sorts as they test drive each other's products. And to be honest, I've never seen a level of cooperation between the services to get after what looks right. Break. On the other side, mission partner environment is an area that we need to tame. This is more ethereal right now, meaning I don't have such a concrete example, but we've done a lot of testing with partners on data exchange, what waveforms are best, what security elements, where data is stored, how to do this in a austere or a denied environment. And there hasn't been an order to what we've done. But what we're focused on right now are some of the challenges we have in our current fielded systems. We've got at the secret level and below a very wonky, problematic array right now with the way that we exchange data with our partners, and it's not sustainable. It's expensive, it doesn't work well, and almost every country has some level of bespoke configuration that makes it really hard to manage. And so we're taking that on as to how do you take what you've got and put it in a repeatable, recognizable, affordable, order. And we have two combatant commands, Central Command and Indo-PACOM Command, that have done phenomenal work to that end. And rather than creating all of that here in DC, we've turned to our combatant commands who have shown progress, and we are helping them organize this in the cross-functional team to see if we can replicate that as a standard. So those are the two areas that are receiving a disproportional amount of attention up front.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa. Let's move on to Jared Serbu with Federal News.
Hey, thanks, Russ, and thanks, General, for doing this. I apologize if you've addressed this. I had to step away for a second, but I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on what you said is going to need to be strong action on the people side. How detailed and specific does the implementation plan get on the concrete actions you need to take to handle some of the people issues? Are you mostly still at the problem identification stage, or do you know what you need to do on the people side?
Yeah, we're far more developed there. And unfortunately, it's not because of our wisdom and somehow we dedicated more time to it. The reason that we're so developed on that end is we've known about these problems for a long time and haven't fixed them. So this is really something that we should have done 5, 7, 10 years ago. What the implementation plan finally does is really put that accountability and measurable steps against each one of those discrete parts that we've discovered. I've kind of outlined a little bit of that on what we're trying to tackle, but the workforce is evolving. There's different needs. There's different skill sets. There are certain people we'd actually need on staff to do the work belonging, to us, and there's others that could be contracted out to do that as a service. But we've got to ensure, for example, I'll just give you a few examples that we've known about. When it comes to recruitment, people just don't fall out of the sky and decide I'm going to come over and join the government. And it's tough to find where those jobs are. It's difficult to onboard. It's timely. There's security, security concerns. I mean, we make it difficult. And in many cases, maybe it's necessary because we want to be thorough, but in many cases it's not. We've just got to get better at it. We've got to understand our market better. We've got to understand, if you're part of the team, what's your developmental pathway? One of the biggest disappointments I've had is that there are certain career paths in these technical fields that it's unclear how you advance, what schools you attend, how you progress, what the expectations are. These are reasonable things for people to want to know when they join an organization of our size. So what we have is well-intentioned people who've got a laser focus on this, but now we've come together in a more holistic way, and we've committed to fixing this. So I'm incredible for everything that I've just said that sounds pessimistic, is that we're slow in doing it. I'm incredibly optimistic that we finally got a beat on it, and we understand what needs to be done. And I think the order of prosecution makes sense. And our leadership in the building, from the secretary on down, support from Congress, there's not a single entity that I interact with that isn't ahead of me right now, spurring me, empowering us as an effort to get after this as our highest priority. People really are our strength, and our leadership is really committed to fixing it. So yes, we have a head start. It's not nascent, and I would expect some pretty recognizable changes to that in the few months ahead.
And can you just say a little bit on which communities, for lack of a better word, are implicated by the implementation plan? I mean, I'm guessing it extends pretty far beyond just the traditional IT workforce.
It does, but I think it's manifest more, right? And we in the IT workforce and really in the technical side of it, not in the scientific and technology community. They've always been able to go out and really get, the experts, the data scientists, the chief technicians, and the do test and analysis. They've always been really good at that. I'm talking about the other organizations, especially even within services, in order for us to take our visions and implement them on day-to-day operations and how we do business. That's really what's been lacking. So I think you'll see this at the service level. Certainly, I think you'll see this at the support level, where this will be manifest. And the very first question, I think, or question or two that opened up is related to this as well. In addition to the right workforce to work some of this, the training and education responsibility for everybody needs to be raised, and that's addressed here as well. So this is about raising the competency of the user. Because, again, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, someone might say, that's someone else's problem to solve. But we're all dependent on technology. And there's got to be a level of understanding. We understand it's clear for our security, right? We do things, I know we use the term cyber hygiene, which is a terrible term. And I know that we've, talked before that, hygiene for some maybe is optional. So maybe cyber hygiene is a bad way to look at it. Cyber security is not optional. So we've got to train and educate everybody who will use this space properly. So it even affects the non-technical user of this. So yes, I think you'll see this primarily focused on the professional cadre we need in the non-S&T community.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jared. Next question goes to Brianna Riley with Inside Defense.
Thanks so much for doing this. Back to Teresa's question on the MVPs. Mission Partner Environment has been in the works for years. I'm wondering, is part of the reason you're prioritizing it now because of Russia's aggressions in Ukraine, or can you shed further light on why it ranks so highly among your priorities? And then beyond that, what's the timeline look like for delivering capabilities here? Thank you.
Sure. Well, I would say that, to answer your question directly, no, we didn't spur it on or elevate it as a result of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. MPE, as you've said, has been in the work quite some time ago, and we made this a priority formally, in the strategy, which was written over a year ago. It made the cut as a line of effort because of one real principle. we're never going to fight alone. We're always going to rely on partners. We need partners. There's not an operation or activity, especially at scale, that we can think of that we'll do this by ourselves. We need our partners and our allies, and so we need to get better at it. You are correct. This has gone on for some time. There's been pockets of success in areas, but what was lacking, to be fair, is, if you asked me the question 5 years ago, what's your operational design? Forget the priorities. Where are you going? What do you want to accomplish? I don't think we could have said. Yet we were very busy. Lots of action, lots of testing, a lot of sharing. But to what point? This puts a fine point on delivery. And really, since we're talking about data exchange, our number one MPE priority is in the system and systems that provide that information exchange at the COCOM level, which is why I listed CENTCOM and INDOPACOM. They struggle in their environments, like all combatant commands do, to make sure that we have the right apparatus technically in place. We can always put filters on. We know what information can and cannot be shared. But if you don't have the transport apparatus, if you can't share data, if there's no common repository, how do our partners do JADC2? And how do they look at their own decision-making cycle if we can't connect at the data level? And that's really why MPE is so important. Timelines was the second part of your question. This gets a little trickier. Right now, not all the budget decisions have been made. So I'm guessing, as I look at this, our ask, the deputy secretary has a very tough job ahead of her because we've asked for everything. I think we've prioritized fairly well, but if you add these up, I'm confident it's more money than we have to do all of it right now. So we have to make the case. What are the prerequisites that have to be in place to take that next step? Which things can be spread out? What things don't you want? Maybe there's wisdom in not spending so much money in certain areas because you want to see how they play out and develop rather than over investing in an area. So we do need to make some tough choices in the department on which pieces of this get fielded at what points. And we are prepared using the I-plan to go through that DMAG and budgetary process. We also have a close eye on budget, on continuous resolutions. Some of this are new starts, and I think all of us know that new starts can be challenging in a CR environment. I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm not convinced that slowed where we've been right now, but in the future, if that becomes a way of practice and it becomes more common, delivery of certain aspects, especially new start aspects of JADC2, will be hampered as other programs have been.
Thank you. Quick follow-up on the funding elements. Can you speak ballpark figures about the level of funding the I-plan is recommending, and will any of those funding recommendations, be reflected in the FY23 budget request? Thanks.
I can answer the latter. The answer is yes, very clearly. We've already had placeholders in. Even though this document, the I-plan itself, was recently signed, we've been in constant battle rhythm events with our leadership on where we saw this forming up. So it's not as though it was just dropped in the environment and we're now trying to take a look at this for the first time. We had a pretty strong understanding of where these would fall out. And so, yes, we have a solid plan, I think, or at least a good recommendation maybe on how that'll land for 23. As for how much money overall, I don't think I fully have a reliable answer to give you, but even if I did, I probably wouldn't share it. I'm not keen to get out ahead of the secretary and deputy secretary's battle space in that area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. Last question goes to Sang-Min Lee with Radio Free Asia.
Yes, I have a question about how to apply to Korean Peninsula. So there is a discussion about you included the ally to United States to JET2. So do you thinking about the Korean forces can be included in the JET2, and also how to apply that the North Korea threat in Korean Peninsula?
No, that's a great question. And the short answer is yes, completely included. And that's part of that combatant command roll-up that I described earlier. And specifically to the Republic of Korea, the Centrix K apparatus, the very command and control system that it uses is one of many that are out there for all of our partners that we're trying to ensure stays modernized, viable, and again, meets the needs of warfighters in that theater and how the theater is fed with timely information. That particular system itself is in the scope of JADC2 reformation, all designed to empower and increase that information sharing end state. So the answer is yes, absolutely included.
My following question, how about the jet related to the US versus Korea against the North Korean threat?
Yes, so I look at, all threats that combatant commands bring to the table are being tested against our JADC2 model in very discrete parts. So yes, the threat on the Korean Peninsula gets the same treatment that we would get threats in other geographical areas. And what we're looking for in that analysis is where we come up short. And again, just being honest, there are many good ideas that are hatched in the CFT that when they're put to the test, we find out we have gaps. We might have been too focused on one particular threat stream, or we've not leveraged what an adversary could bring to the table. But the threat on the peninsula itself and the threat regionally is considered in that combatant command planning and its vetting and testing against JADC2.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. That concludes all the questions that we have. Let's turn it over to you for any closing comments.
No, I hope this is an ongoing dialogue. I really do appreciate the opportunity to interact. I think the questions are hard hitting and they should be. I've given you the most honest answer I can on where I'm optimistic and where we have work to do. This will be a journey for us, but a journey that I hope is different than we've had in the past. Meaning that, if this was a factory, we have a conveyor belt. We are now focused from our most senior leader on down to delivery of a capability, and we're going to learn from it. It's not all going to be perfect, but we're going to learn by doing, and that time has already started. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, General. And journalists, if you have any questions you need answered, please send them to me and I'll work with the Joint Staff on completing those. Thank you for calling in. Thank you, General. Have a great day.